Be really solid in your values and really flexible about how you get to implement them.
Today, we welcome in former Executive Director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Cindy Cohn, to emphasize the importance of standing up for your values along your growth journey while knowing that an open mind will still remain necessary. Having been at the center of some of the most rapid periods of change in history, Cindy sheds light on the importance of team throughout such periods, while ensuring that no matter how big or small the change we may experience, our purpose can always be protected by the work we love most. Well, let's go find out what it means to Cindy Cohn to be growth ready. Hello there, and welcome back into the most recent installment of the Growth Ready Podcast. Really excited to dive into this one today with Cindy Cohn because there's so much to your story that I just feel as though is going to not only allow us to get some exposure to an industry and topics that aren't necessarily top of mind and something that we're always talking about in culture today, but you're also in a very interesting situation with your career currently. And I think that's always fascinating to have someone who's in these types of situations, as we're about to discover with you. But before we go any further, Cindy, as you know, when it comes to this show, I have to ask you this one question before we get started. And what does it mean to you to be growth ready?
To me, it means to be really solid in your values and really flexible about how you get to implement them.
Ooh, I am immediately drawn to the yin and the yang that I'm hearing straight away. This idea of solid values, but flexibility in implementation. Give me some context around how this is the way in which you personally want to respond to this question. What is it about your journey that really reinforces, let's say, this response that you've just provided?
Well, look, I just stepped down from a 26-year career doing something that did not exist as a career when I started. If you'd have asked, me in law school or anyone who knew me in undergrad, a digital rights lawyer wasn't even a thing, much less a thing you would think I would be, get to be a leader of at the time. What I knew was that I wanted to help make the world a better place and that I wanted to stand up for other people and help protect their rights as I kind of grew as a person. But doing that in the context of the online environment, the digital world, it wasn't really even on the radar at the time that I was thinking about, what do you want to do when you grow up? But I got an opportunity in the early 90s to step in to one of the very early fights about this and, got to figure out a way to live my values and help protect everybody in this new digital world. So I think that to me, this rigidity in you really got to be, I really felt like it was important to me as a person in my heart to be committed to making the world a better place, but extremely flexible about what that meant, including building a career that didn't exist when I was a kid. Those two things served me pretty well.
It's a really fascinating insight from the sense of, I'm a father to a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. And for me, I'm at that point now where every single week, there's something they want to grow up and be when they're older. It's something different, whatever the top of mind is. They're big into science right now. We're having a big science craze in our house.
Nice.
And what I find always interesting with that is that there seems to be this narrative, if you will, with the child as they're growing up, like, know what you want to be when you're older.
Yes.
As if there's this square hole and we're a square peg and we're going to insert ourselves right in that. And what I love about the way in which you've come to this realization on your journey is that the sense of self that it sounds as though you had, and you allowed that to drive the adaptive qualities, what I'm hearing, to what you ended up becoming and moving into. Where do you think that sense of self was established, let's say?
I don't know. It's hard to tell. I in the book, I try to talk a little bit about it, but I admit it's kind of amateur psychology, right? You really don't know how you came to be the way you are. I think, for me, I felt like I grew up in the Midwest, in Iowa, where it was kind of the land of plenty. We feed the world in Iowa. I always felt like I was pretty lucky to get to grow up in this place where it just felt like, I had a lot of opportunities to kind of live a very free and open life. In retrospect, there were some challenges. It was definitely hard to be the only Jewish kid in a town that was predominantly Christian. We were, my family wasn't rich, but it didn't feel like we weren't rich. And I think that when I started learning about the struggles of people in the rest of the world, whether that was, kind of in Africa, I've done a lot of work in Africa, or even in parts of the United States where there's a lot more poverty and people who didn't have equal opportunity. I thought I was in a good position to be somebody who could reach out and help. And that just, I don't know. It's so deep in my bones. It's hard to know where it came from. Yeah. I think I think a lot of kids are like that. I think a lot of children want to help. Whether that's the little bird that has the broken wing or whatever. They kind of want to help make things better. And I was lucky enough that I never lost that.
Yeah, I'm immediately drawn to that point because we've talked about this on the show before, is this idea of creativity and curiosity, and it comes so naturally to us at a certain point in our life, and then it feels as though the system, if you will, if you wanted to just put a blanket statement over it, like the system kind of slowly starts to knock it out of you, and you're forced to think a certain way and behave a certain way and move in a certain direction. And I feel as though we are now almost coming back around to the importance of protecting that. I think there is more of a voice for that in this day and age of how can you remain creative? How can you have that passion that you had as an 8-year-old still as a 48, 68, 88-year-old, Yeah. And so I'm curious, you've seen the world maybe almost go through a cycle, go through that evolution of at 1 minute having it pushed out of you, the next, now we're starting to maybe embrace that a little bit more. How comfortable are you maybe encouraging that in others? Because so much of your work has been in a role of leadership. And here you are now coming on a show like mine, we're having this conversation. And again, you're reinforcing, I think, the importance of us leaning into our passions, where we feel as though our values and what we love and appreciate most should be the thing that we do most. So, how is it you've been able to really find comfort in maybe prioritizing that?
I mean, I think there's a lot of luck, right? I've been lucky that the people who I met who were thinking about the future of the internet and how to make it stand with people, were starting a nonprofit and they needed lawyers and they needed legal help. I also had a law firm that let me do my first case for free. So I do not discount the amount of just luck and having other good people help you. On the other hand, I think it's important. Part of the reason why I wanted to write the book is to say that this can happen. It's not a pie in the sky, crazy dream. There's plenty of people in the world who get to do what they're passionate about or get to be. I say do what you're passionate about might feel too narrow, right? Because I was never I'm not, I know plenty of people who are passionate about coding, who really love the intricacies of building a technical tool. I'm not a technical person, but I was able to follow my passion about standing up for other people and trying to make the world more fair and just for other people, in part because I ran into the right people to do it. And then, of course, EFF it's a donor-supported organization. There are 30,000 other people in the world who think it's important for there to be somebody standing up for the rest of us online. And so the philanthropy and the vision of people to say, I want to put my marker down to make sure that there's somebody advocating for not me necessarily in the narrow sense, but me as in the users and the, non-corporate, non-governmental interests, that there needs to be somebody's voice in the conversation standing up for, all the rest of us. That's what led me to allowed me to do this for the 30 years that I've been doing it. So, but I'm not alone. There's plenty of people who support this kind of work and who can support it for the long run. And part of the reason I wanted to write the book is that there were a few books that I read when I was a young lawyer that made me think, wow, maybe I can devote my life to this. And I was hoping that I could maybe be the person who inspired, somebody in the way that I got inspired by those books.
Yeah. I love this idea of this theme of advocacy, and I definitely want to come back to that. But I think context is really important for our listeners right now. So I'd love to just have you explain to us more about the creation of, the growth of, and now the role of the EFF and what they're doing today, and how that work has come about, because I think that's really important for us all to simply just better understand. Because the more having you come on, I've gotten to learn more about it, but I know I can definitely stand to learn more because of the responsibility and the work that the organization's doing.
Yeah, so EFF was founded not by me, but by three visionaries, John Gilmore, Mitch Kapor, and John Perry Barlow. And they were involved in the early internet. This is before the World Wide Web, when most people were, typing on a black screen with green letters. Some people still do that, but we now have better interfaces. But they saw the possibility of this network to connect all the people in the world and give them an opportunity to have their voices heard when they really weren't able to be heard without this kind of digital tool to assist and community to build. So they founded the Electronic Frontier Foundation with the commitment to try to help make sure that as the internet grew and as the law started to interact with this new digital technology, that it was supporting freedom, free speech, connectivity, and the users, and not just being used as a new tool of oppression, or that we were building an internet that supported people more generally and wasn't just a new kind of shopping mall. Right. So I would say that the worries about the government were the predominant ones in the 90s. But as things have developed, making sure that there's space for people, outside of the commercial realm, but more in the personal and community and activism realm, became more and more important as companies, kind of moved in and started to really control a lot of the internet. So we started with a pretty simple couple of ideas, which is the internet should be a place of free speech and the internet should be a place of privacy. And the very first thing that I got asked to do as a young lawyer was to work on this second part, the privacy part, to make sure that the technology that allows us to have a private conversation online, which is called encryption, was available to everybody. And because in the 1990s, the U.S. government treated encryption like a weapon. It was on the things that you could not export from the United States without a license. Software with the capability of maintaining secrecy was on the same list as surface-to-air missiles and tanks and things like that. So we knew that we were going to have to move encryption out of that military mindset in order to make sure that people could have access to the tools that they needed to have a private conversation online, to be, organized, to communicate, and also to have basic security and do transactions as well. I mean, it was always important that we be able to use the internet fully, and that includes commerce. We weren't anti-commerce. There's a difference between being supportive of commerce and wanting commerce to be the only thing online. And so we took on this challenge in the early 90s, and we challenged the export regulations as violating the free speech rights of a computer science PhD student at UC Berkeley who wanted to publish a computer program online that let people encrypt their communications. And lo and behold, we won. The courts recognized that it was a First Amendment problem for the government to be regulating the publication of software. And ultimately, we leveraged that win into getting the government to reduce its restrictions. And that's why we have encrypt the security that we have online, whether that's, using a tool like Signal or WhatsApp or, iMessages to other iMessages users, or just as of last week or so to Android users as well. Or things that happen under the hood of the internet where, when you type in the URL of your bank, you can feel pretty confident that you're going to your bank and that there isn't some third party that's hijacking that communication and sending you to a fake website or something like that. So kind of above the surface in ways that we can see, but also below the hood in the internet. And the freeing up encryption really made a lot of the world possible, and EFF was really one of the strongest champions of making that happen. So that's kind of how EFF started, and we have kind of grown along with the internet, right? In the late 1990s, the World Wide Web happened. Lots more people began to get online, and we were already, here advocating for an internet that stands with users and creators and not opposes government surveillance and censorship.
Yeah. Yeah. What I wanted our listeners to appreciate is that you've been part of an organization that's had to keep up with the rate of change of the internet.
Yes.
Like that is frightening growth. And I'm just curious straight away when I say that, what were some examples? Because I know your book is a memoir, which I'm personally excited to go and obtain myself and certainly read, because what I understand from just the little I've learned about the book is that we not only get your perspective of your journey, but we're pretty much living the life of the internet through your story as well, which I think is just a fascinating idea for a read. And so with that being said, maybe give us some examples of how you as an organization had to adapt to a rate of change to the size of the internet.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it in everything from the kind of 10 or 12 ragtag people that we started with to the 115 people that the organization consists of today. So just in sheer numbers, we have grown a lot. But the scope of what we've had to do has grown a lot, and really trying to stay as plugged into what's happening online as possible and thinking about what do we need to do to meet the moment has been a constant conversation inside the organization. In some ways, it's kind of what makes it fun, right? I mean, we don't just do one thing and do it over and over again. We don't just have one technique. Some examples, the first fights that we had were really vis-a-vis the government, protecting, making sure the internet was a place of free speech, making sure the internet had the tools to let people have privacy. Those were fights where the main fight was us versus at that point in time, the U.S. government, because the U.S. had such an outsized role in the development of the internet and the regulation of the internet in the early days. In the early 2000s, we began to, the late 90s, we realized that copyright law created a threat to the internet. And so we developed a practice that we still have today about trying to really advocate for balance in copyright law so that copyright doesn't become the one law that rules the entire internet. Because the one thing that happens on the internet really cheaply and easily all the time is making copies. Yeah. And copyright law is based on the idea, kind of inherent, that making copies is hard. So when we started making copies easy as a side effect of building the internet, we had to address that. And so that's a piece of the work that we added in the late 90s. Then we started having to, more recently, there was the 9/11 attacks and the Patriot Act, and we had to deal with mass spying, not just targeted spying on the internet, and the impact that has on people's privacy. And those are kind of two of the stories in the book, are some of those fights around that. And then, the rise of the tech giants more recently, and the fact that the internet is increasingly, to many people, really just 5 companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft. And what that meant for the ideas behind freedom and connectivity and things like that, where everybody's in these little walled garden and it's hard to move from one to the other. So we started a section of EFF that's really focused on competition and monopolies, and how do we address civil liberties in a situation in which much of our speech is held on private platforms, not public, and the main regulator of that speech is not the government, it's the private entities. Same with privacy. So we started doing that kind of work. It was well over a decade ago. And then, of course, today, right now, we're starting to really grapple with, I guess, before I even get to today, one more thing that happened is the internet began to be used, first by people all around the world. Yeah. So we developed an international team, but also people who are far more diverse than the early internet was generally a bunch of guys, academics, upper middle class guys or academics or researchers or government people. They didn't, the breadth of who uses and relies on the internet right now in terms of marginalized voices, people who don't look like, John Perry Barlow, John Gilmore, Mitch Kapor, right? Sure. Three really wonderful white guys of about the same age, right? Sure. So, we also really expanded our work kind of partnering with organizations that come out of, communities that are much different than the kind of traditional internet folks to try to make sure that we're thinking about what it means to be free and open and private on the internet, informed by the range of experiences that people online have, which is much broader than it was when we started. And then, of course, most recently, the rise of AI, both in governmental decision-making and in private things like large language models and neural networks, and what that's going to mean for people's privacy, free speech, and freedom online is really front of mind for the organization today. So we just keep growing and changing as the issues facing people online grow and change. And, sometimes we're a little behind the curve where we'd like to be. Sometimes we're a little in front of the curve where we'd like to be, but we really do try to keep abreast of it because the challenges facing people online, they don't stay static.
Right. And I think the way you captured there before giving all those examples of this idea of meeting the moment, each of those moments, they really didn't have anything in common, right? I mean, I'm sure you could learn from each one when the next arose, but at the same time, they were always different in their own unique way. The challenge was always somehow different from the previous one. And I think there's this story of adaptation throughout the time of EFF. And when I think about more significantly the last decade or so, where you've been serving as the executive director for EFF, to actually say, okay, when you think about not only having to lead an organization that is consistently adapting to change, but I'm more curious now about you, the individual, you, Cindy, to be able to say, when you look back on even just recent times, never mind the entirety of the 3 decades that you've spent here with the organization, but even in just recent times, what is your approach to handling this ongoing, never-ending, it feels like, change that's happening around you? Because I want to believe that might be as significant a factor in our entire conversation that people can relate to most. Because I think in our own unique way, we're all adapting to our own version of change.
Yeah.
But it would just be really hard to ever argue with you that you're you're not having to adapt to a rate of change that's greater than the rest of us. So I would just love to better understand how you yourself have been able to really just handle the gravity within which you're being challenged to change within all of this ongoing change.
I mean, I would say the first thing is I never have done any of this alone. We have a team at EFF. I have a solid team of people, and I try to keep a mix of folks, right? We call them the PIT crew, the public interest technologists. We have a bunch of technologists, some are, very straightforward hackers. And I mean that in the best sense of the word, but there's also people who have been inside, big institutions and things like that, who really want to, make the world a better place and have thrown in with us. And so a lot of listening, right? A lot of being open to have people come to you and say, hey, look, this thing is happening and we need to think about what we want to do about it. And then, kind of talking and listening both inside EFF and outside EFF to what's really going on, and watching for the places where we can use our resources, which are pretty small compared to some of the fights that we're into. Where can we find that leverage point where if we push a little this way, we can make some big change, right? And head towards things. But, that's the place where the steadiness and the values comes in, right? Because the context changes, but what we're trying to do in terms of empowering people, making sure they have the tools they need to protect themselves, stopping the surveillance and the way that disempowers people. The values really don't change. What changes are the kind of context in which you have to fight for them or stand up for them or think about them. And to me, having a pretty widely diverse. I mean, everybody's a little geeky at EFF. I would say that we all have that in common, but otherwise a pretty wide range of personal experiences to bring to bear. And then listening and trying to figure it out together. I love the process of sitting around, whether it's a table or increasingly a Zoom, and like hashing through, what should we do? How can we try this? What about this? And coming up with some first steps of things that we might want to try. So I think that, activism and law is a team sport, and leaning into the team is what helps me think about how to lead this. I really believe in leading from below in terms of like listening to people and often, it's the random intern or the newest hire that comes in with something that is really worth listening to. And if we're doing it right, we hear them the first time. Sometimes I would say it's true that we have to wait till the second or third time before we kind of are able to hear it. I think that's part of just, trying to build an institution, though, that can hear itself and not just hear the leadership is really key. And it is not obvious or simple to do that, because the tendency, especially as you get bigger, right? And as the organization cracks 60, 80, 100 people, trying to make sure that I'm hearing from everybody and that I know everybody and that I can take in ideas from across the organization takes a lot more conscious thought than it did when there were like 20 of us, right?
Sure. And, the first part of your response that I want to just almost make as concise as possible is never change alone. Like I really heard that come through straight away. And I really hope folks hear that, because I think change is typically a solo sport too often. We assume that this is our change, this is our problem, so to speak. We're the one dealing with it. Why would we make this a burden on someone else, et cetera, et cetera? What I'm hearing from you is a very intentional step. Once you recognize you're experiencing change, immediately lean on others, immediately go to the masses, if you will.
Yep. Finding a few people who can help like lay it out. And I'm lucky. EFF is a well-known, respected organization. So like if there's a question I have about, how does AI affect ordinary people, I can call up some people who, I can start and be like, I need somebody to sit down and talk this through with me. And I think the thing that is important to remember when you're doing this is that people love to give you advice. They love to tell you about their world. They love to tell you what they know. And I would say that is a trait of geeks in every venue. It's definitely a case in my world of internet geeks, where people are hungry to tell you what they're seeing or what they think about things. And then if you can open up your kind of ears and not bring your judgments in it and just sit and listen for a while, you learn so much. And then you can take that back and then you figure out, okay, what of this is useful? What can I build for me anyway, a lawsuit about or a campaign about, to try to really help make things better for people. But I have been, and again, I don't think this is just EFF, but it's definitely the case. I have been pleasantly surprised at how willing other people are to talk through the situation with you.
Yeah. I think you nailed it. There's almost not necessarily, I was about to say ego, but it's almost complimentary, right? It's complimentary in the sense of, oh, wow, you're coming to me for this? Surely they see a value that I could bring and contribute right here. And so why wouldn't I be forthcoming? Why wouldn't I be generous in what it is I feel could be of benefit in this moment? And I think we're all too good at dismissing that at times. I think we're and again, being a British person, we're incredibly dismissive anyway. It's just in our behavior. But the fact is that I just think often change is something we protect and keep private. And I'm really hearing that encouragement from you to lean on others. But the other part of your response earlier as well is this idea of, yes, the steadiness in our values, but then you went a little further and you talked about how we need to have the tools to protect those values as well. And I'd love for you to speak on that a little bit more now, in the sense of, I think we live at a time where if we need a tool, we can find a tool. But what you said is that we need to find the tools to protect. And for me, the challenge is in the protecting. It's saying that, how can we actually say that not only have I found a tool that can allow me to represent my values, that can allow me to stay true to myself, but how do I make sure that I'm doing the work to protect it so that I can continue to do those very things, as opposed to allowing these outside influences to maybe steer me away from such values? I'd love to learn just a little bit more about really your experience, or really what you even mean by this idea of tools that we can protect as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the first place that goes for me is kind of on a policy or legal side, right? Like, we're living sometimes, in order to protect the tools that we need. Say we're protecting encryption, we need to be able to continue to have a private conversation online. Well, we might need to get engaged in telling our representatives that, because there are periodically attempts in Congress, the last one was called Earn It, to try to take away the tools of privacy or limit them. Right now, we're seeing some of this in the cases where people are very mad at the social media companies, and they're attacking the fact that social media companies provide a way for people to talk to each other in private as a problem, when I think that's actually, we don't want to live in a world where everything you say is exposable to the companies or the governments that are trying to have more power over us. That's not a good world. Sure. Well, what does that mean? It may mean we have to say, look, we have to find a better way to protect children than making everybody less safe by taking away encryption technologies. There are so many other ways that we could help protect children online than making everybody naked in all of their communications. There's a reason that companies like Facebook support age verification, right? Is because that's a way to get even more information about us, and especially information about our children, under the guise of trying to protect them, right? Sure. So what do we need to do? Well, we may need to actually make our voices heard to our representatives. We may need to make a lot of noise about the proposed attack on these tools of privacy. Similarly, and again, I'm an activist. I work in the policy spaces and the legal spaces, but sometimes you can't make individual decisions that protect yourself. You have to actually join with others to make your voices heard together in order to be heard. Because right now we live in a world where you can't simply check all the right boxes and have privacy. We actually don't have the individual power to protect our privacy right now. We have to do collectively. So there's, right now there's a fight in Congress over something called Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act. I'm taking you deep into policy now, sorry. But this is how the government is engaging in the mass spying that it's doing. Enough members of Congress are uncomfortable about the mass spying and the lack of a warrant requirement for the FBI to have access to this information, that they have let the program expire. That's great. It's a very good start. But if we want them to continue to push for the warrant requirement, we need to tell them that what they're doing is the right thing, and that they need to stay the course, and they need to stay strong. This is a bipartisan group of Congress members. Andy Biggs of Arizona, who is a very, very conservative member of Congress, has partnered with Ron Wyden of Oregon, who's a very, very liberal member of Congress. Sure. And so the coalition isn't politically, pigeonholable. It's more, but letting members of Congress know that this is important to you, and that you think that your privacy is important enough for them to make the NSA and the FBI get a warrant before they access this wholesale information is something you can do right now, that will help protect your privacy online. So that's just one example. There are communities locally that are concerned about things like automated license plate readers. One from a company called Flock that your listeners may have heard of. There's another one from a company called Motorola that are being deployed, and there are local communities everywhere saying we want to be able to drive around our town without being tracked all the time.
Sure.
Take off these cameras. And there are communities, we keep a list of all the ones that have been unplugged, and there's a lot of them now. So these are the kinds of things that I think of when I think about protecting. It's not only like making your settings right and using Signal where you can, or other kinds of use Tor if you don't want to be tracked and you're doing there are individual things you can do. But if you really want to protect things, you can't. Individual alone won't get us there.
Yeah, and I think that in itself is a really interesting just insight. This idea of what you may feel is right for you as an individual isn't necessarily what's right for the greater good and what's right for the larger consensus. And I think there's some lessons in that statement alone, whether it be specific to privacy and data, et cetera, that you could potentially be exposing yourself around, or just for anybody who's trying to go back to even how you answered, the initial question around what it means to be growth ready. I mean, when it comes to your values, that flexibility, what I'm hearing, flexibility can be adaptability and understanding that whilst this may not seem like it's what I want in this moment, when I really just sit in my cleanest of clean values, what is the right thing to do right now? What is the most appropriate step that I can take in this moment? And how might that be away from what I actually personally want to see happen as well?
Sometimes, I mean, that is true that occasionally, your personal issues are actually at conflict with what's better for the greater good. I think it's also often the case that your personal issues are just not hitting on the issues for the greater good. So it may not always be that you have to compromise your personal goals to get to the bigger ones, but it may mean that you need to think about stuff that you otherwise wouldn't think is relevant to you, or may not be relevant to you today. So in surveillance, this happens a lot where people are like, well, I have nothing to hide, so I have nothing to fear, so I'm not going to take any steps to protect my privacy. And that may be absolutely true if you're a person who already has power in society. But the reason we might need to protect these things and that you might need to take a stance or support protecting them might not be for you. It might be for someone you love or someone you know. In America right now, there are a few people who don't know anybody with a green card, anybody who's ever immigrated from another part of the world, anybody who is ever seeking reproductive assistance. I know you're in Louisiana where that's a big issue as well. Maybe it doesn't hit you at all ever,
Sure.
But it probably hits somebody you love,
Sure.
or somebody you care about, or somebody who you think it's important to be able to be here and not get swept up in a deportation raid or prosecuted for helping someone get reproductive help. So sometimes your narrow what's best for you interest might not be the only thing you think about, and it might mean that you do something that isn't directly supportive of you. But it might not be something that actually hurts you. It's just something that might your sphere of what you care about might be a little bigger than you think it is.
100%, 100%. And I think so much of this falls under this theme of advocacy as well. And I think when I think about how you answered that initial question, advocacy really speaks to that. And I would love to now put the spotlight almost on you and you alone, in the sense of when you think about being an advocate for yourself. It's just, I really want to almost push you now to sort of learn a little bit more of how you've been able to remain true to that part of this. Because in my world of executive coaching, the amount of times that I am just facing these moments where I go, you're so focused on what's best for everybody around you, said leader, said business owner, whatever it might be. When are you going to stand up for you? When are you going to be an advocate for really what you know deep down either you're capable of or what matters most or whatever it is? So I have no doubt that you've had so many different influences and opportunities. I mean, you probably lost count of the amount of opportunities you could have said, okay, white flag, that this is too much, this is too big a mountain to climb, and yet you've remained an advocate for what matters most to you all of these years. So talk us through how one maybe remains an advocate for themselves under, quite frankly, some true pressure throughout the years.
Yeah, it's a really good and important question, because I would say that it's not my nature to do that. I think I'm in good company with a lot of other executives where what you're committed to is the cause. And so you put yourself maybe third, fourth, or fifth on the list. I mean, I think there is a very reasonable point to be made, is that there is something amazing about waking up every day and feeling like you're part of the good guys and that you're trying to make the world a better place. And then that serves me personally. I am very excited and happy to be in a righteous fight. And to be so in some ways in my head, I'm the warrior. I'm the warrior for justice. And that feeds me as much as it might help everybody else. That this self-image of myself as the person who comes and helps is really important. Now, that's kind of a dodge of your question, right? But I get it. That,
at least you own it. That's all. Yeah. That's important.
I would say that I have been. I tend to go to other people. I tend to try to, at some point I realized that the job of being the executive director of EFF was too big. And I built a leadership team. I built an executive team. I hired a chief operating officer and gave them all of the internal care and feeding of the humans of EFF, so that I could focus more on the part of the job that really feeds me, which is what should be our positions on things, and doing more program side work and less administrative support. So I built a team that could take some of that weight off of me, and just reserved, you're still the ED, you can't shirk it entirely, right? But we set everything up so that inside the organization, I'm largely either I have a veto or a tiebreaker, but otherwise I don't get involved in a lot of decisions. I don't make the decision about whether it's time for someone to leave the organization or whether we, let somebody move from one place to the other. But I have a veto, because ultimately, at the end of the day, if I think it's not the right move, I need to be able to do the right thing for the organization. I probably used that 3 times in the last 10 years. And the other one is the tiebreaker. So if my trusted team can't decide, then I will weigh in and help decide them. But the decision to build a leadership team and to really give them real power and pick the pieces of the job that feed me and prioritize those over the ones that drain me, and find people who it feeds to be in the midst of a HR. There are people who like that. It is not my favorite spot. Sure. So I think a whole set of kind of institutional structural decisions that I made over the past 10 years that got kind of supercharged during COVID, because, it became the care and feeding of the organization became so central for so long that I was really missing the actual program work. Those are all things I made to try to make the job work for me.
Yeah. And I think, you may have initially kind of dodged, but I think you actually answered it quite directly there towards the end, because for me, this idea that we can all do a better job, firstly, of protecting the parts of our world that really feeds us.
Yeah.
It really does fill our cup. There's always going to be seasons where we feel as though we're not able to give as much attention to those things as we would like to. But as long as we can always say we're making that intentional effort to protect the ability to do that, that's about the best we can do. And if we're struggling with that, step 2, as you just alluded to, is how do I create the necessary support for the areas that I need to offload? It's not just delegating, it's simply acknowledging that if I don't do that, I cannot protect the areas where my cup is filled most, where I know my value is most aligned.
And if your cup is empty, you can't do it for so long. I call it candy at EFF, and I make sure this is true for me, but also all my leadership team. I'm like, what's the candy? What's the candy in your week? What's the thing that you get to do every week or every day that fills you up rather than drains you? And trying to make sure, and it's different for different people, but trying to make sure that you're actually having an active conversation with everybody in your leadership team about this, and that everybody has, has a little bit of candy in their week.
I love that. Now, before we wrap here, I do want to touch on something I promised I would before we started recording. And we're recording on June 24th, and from my understanding, you left your role June 16th. Is that right?
It's been about a week. Yeah,
about a week. So we're not bored yet, hopefully. But no. What I love about this is this is not the finish. We are not done with your career, and you are very much choosing a current phase where you're going to take the time, strategize, figure out what's best for you. I would love for you just to give our listeners a little bit of context around how you've maybe come to this decision that this is the way that you're going to handle this transition. Because as I shared with you off air, I think sometimes we are given this story that you must have the next step figured out. And I'm hearing that we are creating the step and figuring it out as we go right now. And what a beautiful opportunity to just lean into someone's world who's practicing this in the very moment. So share a little bit more on that for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple, I made the decision well over a year ago that it was time for me to leave EFF. And it was both internal and external. It was both because I miss being as I said, I've got this picture of myself in the head as the warrior, and I was spending less and less time being her. And I'm 62. It was like, if I'm going to get to do this again, like it's, the time is coming, right? To do something if I'm going to do it. Otherwise, it may be too hard to try to start a career again or make a shift. And I had built EFF up. I had this executive team that I'd created and a COO that I'd created. The weight of the job was manageable, such that I felt like I could hand it off to someone else, and they would be able to do it. And so I also am quite concerned looking out in the world at all of the people who kind of get to a position of power and then never want to leave it. And, I'm a good 20 years younger than Dianne Feinstein or some of the ones who I think were particularly egregious about that. Mitch McConnell, we see a lot in politics where we've got these octogenarians who just won't leave. And I am not even close to that age, but I didn't want to be that person. Nobody can move up if the people on the top don't leave and create space. So I wanted to create space, but I also wanted to get back to what I loved. So so that was the decision. I worked with the board, and we did we've got a wonderful new executive director named Nicole Ozer, who's an old friend of mine. So I'm very happy about it. And then I had to decide, I know I want to get back in the fight, but I didn't know exactly how yet. And I decided that I would figure out a way to at least have 6 months. I'm not a wealthy person. That's about as much as I could float before I would need a new job. But also that's enough time to do the dismount and clear the decks and have a little space to see what comes up and see if there's a right fit with some of the folks that I've worked with for a long time. And so I've started those conversations before I left. I wouldn't say I'm completely at zero, but I haven't. I promised myself I wouldn't pick the next thing until I'd at least been out of EFF for, 4 to 6 weeks at the best, but it probably ought to be 4 to 6 months, and take that space and just see what I really want to do. Because when you're in the thick of it, and especially in the thick of, I launched a book, trying to bring in the new executive director, help my team and the organization deal with the fact that I've been there for 26 years and I'm leaving, which is, no one who works at the organization now remembers a time when I was not there.
Right.
So helping the organization, helping everybody deal with it, while not at the same time trying to figure out the next thing for me, just seemed to make sense. So, so I'm in this zone, and I'm only a week into it. So I still feel like I'm kind of still got that feeling like I'm just on vacation from EFF, not that I've actually left it. I did drop off my keys yesterday, though. That was a big moment.
There you go. So it's so encouraging, I think, for anybody. You and I share a similar story in the sense of when I decided to start my business, I left my former career. I gave my wife and I said, you have 6 months. You got 6 months to figure this thing out. We can't afford for it to be any longer than that.
Yep.
And I think anyone listening to this who's ever dared to dream, dared to do anything like this, hey, we're not telling you to go do it, but we are maybe acknowledging that there could be a plan in place beforehand, and there could be a few outreaches that you do beforehand, and you could be better off for making a timeline for how long you can go. I think we've given you a couple of insights here that you can maybe take with you if this is something you're thinking about. But Cindy, this has been an absolute delight and pleasure. I've really enjoyed this opportunity just to learn more about an industry I was certainly uneducated on, your journey, your story. Before I let you go, please tell us about the book, and then also tell us where we can get it and anywhere we can learn more about you as well, obviously.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, well, all the proceeds from the book go to EFF, so EFF.org, and you can learn more about the breadth of the work that the organization does. You can also get the book there, and if you do, more of the money comes to us. But you can also get the book anywhere you buy books, whether that's Amazon, Audible, in your local bookstore, bookstore.org, which I love because it supports
and the name of the book is?
bookstores.
And the name of the book?
It's called Privacy's Defender, My 30-Year Fight Against Digital Surveillance. It comes out of MIT Press, and it's a gorgeous cover. And I hope it gives people a window into what it's like to build a movement and to stand up for rights in a new environment like the digital one.
Absolutely. Well, it will be a different read for me, but I immediately acknowledge that I will certainly be grabbing a copy, and it will work its way into my rotation at some point. I'm excited to give it a read and learn more about
I'd love
all
to
the
hear
things.
what you think. I'll be very
100%. I will be happy to share it. But for now, Cindy, again, such a pleasure. Thank you for just the generosity of insights, of stories. There's no doubt our listeners will have taken away a number of different thoughts and ideas from your journey. And so I just appreciate that generosity, and best of luck with the transition and all that is coming your way.
Thank you so much.